And hello there, everyone, and welcome to the Showing Up to Your Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and I'm so happy to be here with you this morning. And yes, I'm excited. I'm always excited to talk to you. And so today, as I told you, I'm going against the little black book today, and I do this sometimes. I have license to do it. The black book is not a sentence of any sort. It contains sentences, but it is not a hard and true, rule. Like we're flexible with things, and that's part of being mindful, right? Being mindful and being healthy, really, psychologically and physically healthy requires a little flexibility, right? A little adaptability and a little bit of openness, right? A little bit of understanding that sometimes, when circumstances change, when more information becomes available, when things mature and things grow and things get to an evolved place, well, a lot of times what we thought at some other point before all of this change happened is no longer valid, right? In other words, just because it seemed like the right thing to do 2 days ago with new information, new understanding, it's not necessarily, the same, there might be a better sort of, option. And that's what I have found today. And so, yesterday we talked about how the only thing that you can possibly control, right, is yourself, right, in terms of your emotions and your sort of consciousness, right? Like you can't make somebody else think a certain way, right? You can try to convince somebody to think a certain way, right? But you can't make somebody think a certain way. It's just not possible, right? Because the thinking is done within inside their little skull, and you cannot get in there, right? I mean, unless you're a brain surgeon, but even then, you're not really changing the way anybody thinks. Even a brain surgeon, that's actually kind of a good point. You can cut off the ability to think at all, right, by disconnecting various regions of the prefrontal cortex, the way they used to do in those horrible lobotomy operations that they used to do to people who were declared insane, right, irreparably insane. They would literally just scramble the prefrontal cortex so that the people could no longer generate thoughts the same way, right? But even that, we don't know that they're not thinking, right? We just know that they're not able to to motivate themselves with their thoughts, right? And so even on a structural level, it's way more mysterious than that, and it's way more sort of hidden than that, right? The ability to think, so you literally cannot control what anybody else thinks, right? You also cannot control anybody else's emotions. Right, and this is what we covered yesterday. I don't have to go through the whole thing again today. That's going to be a big waste of time here. But as we talked about that, this is what we're talking about in terms of, what we expect from someone else, right? As I said yesterday, a lot of times when somebody is doing something that bothers us, right, something that triggers us in some way, right, a lot of times, most of the time, we have an attitude that, okay, I need them to stop that behavior. I need to change what they are doing so that I will feel better. As I said, that's not the way it works, right? And so again, I explained all that yesterday. So if you want to, sort of freshen up, if you missed yesterday, I suggest you go and look, because today what we're going to talk about is sort of, the from the outside looking in on someone, right? The reality is the same way that we cannot control what somebody thinks, and we cannot control what somebody feels, and we cannot control even somebody's reactions or actions in general. We also don't know, and we will never know unless we have an intimate understanding of this person, what makes their thoughts and their emotions go, right? What creates that? And furthermore, right? And that's what that statement is, just to say we don't know what somebody's been through in their life, right? There's there's a lot of ways to look at this. Like you could look at the person who, like myself. Like people probably look at me and they see my belly and they're like, "Oh man, look at that guy. He's let himself go." But what they don't realize is that a few years ago, I lost over 100 pounds, right? And while I put some of that weight on, I'm trying to lose it again. I'm working really hard at that. But somebody wouldn't know that just looking at me. All they would see is somebody who is overweight, right? And so we have no idea what somebody's been through. And again, unless we have an intimate understanding of that person. But the thing is that there's intimate, right? There's those people with whom you are intimate. Those are your immediate family, probably your parents, maybe even your siblings, if you're lucky enough to have maintained an intimate relationship with your siblings throughout your adult life. Many people do, many people don't. So aside from that group, and maybe some close friends, right? Aside from that group of intimates, right? Now what do we have? Now we have strangers, right? Who are people who you see on a bus or in a coffee shop, or, just driving in another car while you're driving down the road, right? But then there's a lot of in between, right? There's people we work with. There's people we see at the gym. There's people we see at a mindfulness meeting every week on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, hosted by your friend Art Burns. We see people walking through, we see the same people working at a store, over and over again, right? Like that's one for me that I've always been the guy doing the grocery shopping in my house, right? For many, many years, right? And so I've gotten to know the clerks at the different supermarkets, and I love that. I see them like once a week. It's like, oh, hey, how's your week been? It's so nice to see you. That's a connection that I try to make with people, right? But I don't know them intimately, and they're not a stranger. Right? They're somewhere in between. And in fact, that's a big, big chunk of people in our lives who are in that in between, right? Neither intimate nor stranger, right? But that's the thing, right? So for the strangers, we normally don't get to a point where we are interacting on an emotional level, right? A stranger is, hi, how are you? Nice to see you, or hey, man, I hope the door open for you, or hey, after you can get on the bus first, or that kind of stuff, right? That's the depth at which we get. And maybe we'll have a little conversation on the bus in 5-10 minutes or something like that. But that's really it, right? There's nothing beyond that, right? And so with this big group in the middle, right, of the people who we know their names, we know what they're kind of about, we know, like how they like to dress, we know what they look like, we have just a general sense of who they are, right? But we do not know very much about them, right? And so with the, again, with the strangers, it's going to apply what I'm going to say to the strangers too. So just give them a second, okay? But let's put the stranger group to the side for a second, right? And let's really talk about the intimates and the, what do we call them? The semi-intimate, the known. I don't know what we're going to call that group, but let's talk about these two groups, right? So everyone that you see, including the intimates, but even though we put them aside, we're not going to forget about them, right? And they're included in my statement that I'm going to make right now, right? And the statement that I'm going to make right now is that an alarming amount of people, and I mean alarming, like at least 75% of the people who are out there in the world, right? I mean, that's a hard number to put. I don't know what the percentage is. I don't know that data. But I do know, for instance, I know that 25% of people who have been studied in vast studies of people who have experienced childhood trauma, right? Part of the adverse childhood experience, the ACE test, right? When they were developing that, they did exhaustive and really amazing research on this. So you're talking about thousands upon thousands of people who were surveyed and studied. They actually did it through hospitals because they already had these this vast information. So they just put a few questions in the regular patient kind of survey, and that's how they gleaned a lot of this data. But what they show in this data is that, for instance, and I don't have all the data in front of me, but for instance, one that I remember because it resonates with me is that 25% of us, 25% of the population in the U.S. at least, experienced unhealthy, abusive levels of hitting from their parents. Now, your parents, like, or some of their parents like mine might have said, oh, it's just a spanking, it's good for you. That's BS. Right? It's not good for you. It's traumatizing, right? Because what happens is, and it's automatically traumatizing. This is one of those that people, people really dismiss this a lot. Whether it's me dismissing it, that, oh, it wasn't that bad, I probably deserved it, that kind of thing, right? Or other people dismiss it in terms of like, well, how bad could it be, right? But the reality is that when your parent, right, when you're in at a certain age, of course it changes as you grow, but before the age of 5 or 6 or 7, if you are being hit by your parents, okay, especially if, like me, you had pretty much a single parent, right? My father was very absent. He was only around, here and there, like on the weekends and stuff. And really, and this is a double whammy for me, that my mother used to use him as the disciplinarian. But she'd be, smacking the crap out of me all week. And then when my father finds out, it's going to be even worse, he never hit me, but it was always just scary, psychological stuff. Like, you're going to be a loser, that kind of stuff. Like, really fun, Ozzie and Harriet for sure. But anyway, the thing is that if you, especially if you have a single parent situation, right, and that single parent is hitting you, well, then, as the person being hit by this is your parent, right? This is the person who is supposed to be there for you no matter what. This is supposed to be the one person in the whole universe that you can count on, come rain or shine, hell or high water. This is the person. Right? This is the person who feeds you. This is the person who changed your diapers. This is the person who gave you baths. This is the person who sang you to sleep at night. Right? This is your guiding light. This is the person who means everything in your life as a child. And now this person is violently striking you, even if it's just a spanking, right? Which, you have this like romantic, Norman Rockwell view of a cute little hiney on the lap and, just getting a little spanking. But that's not what it ever is. Come on. Let's be honest here, right? That's not what it is. Because really the spanking, and then this is something I realized very early on, is that, early on in my own parenthood, is that when my mother used to hit me, it had nothing to do with correcting my behavior. It had everything to do with her working out her rage, right? So even if it's supposed to be just a little swat, I mean, she's laying into it because she's so upset at that point, right? And so getting back to what I'm talking about here, if that one person who is supposed to be the person who cares for you is this person inflicting such violence upon you, well, the problem is that the only way to avoid trauma in a certain circumstance like that, the only way to avoid trauma in that circumstance is for your mother or your caregiver to comfort you. But that's the person who's beating you. So it's like automatic trauma, right? Now, is it the same trauma as someone who was sexually abused? No, it's not. But does it have a similar impact? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And that's the thing. Right? Like when we look at somebody and we say, oh, that person was sexually abused as a child, it's like aghast. And it is ghastly. I mean, it's horrible. It's just despicable that any adult would ever do that to a child. That's just horrendous, right? But we have this sense like, well, that didn't happen to me. All I did was get hit by my mother. But as I just described to you, that to a 7-year-old boy is just the same. Right? It's not that much different. To the 7-year-old boy, right? In a court of law or in the court of public opinion, it's a completely different world. But to the 7-year-old child, it's just as traumatizing, right? And so my point is that contrary to popular belief, and do you realize that I'm reading this amazing book, and this book is really amazing. If anybody out there who has dealt with trauma in their life, as I have, this book is like a must-read. The Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk. He's a Dutchman, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Amazing book. And so one of the things that he talks about in this book is that is that I've lost my train of thought about how wonderful this book is. Anyway, the point is that trauma, right? As again, that's I think I'm back. So what I was gonna say. Sorry about that. I do that all the time to you. I'm sorry. Um, so one of the things that I'm realizing reading this book, right, is that, and again, I just told you that 25% of us were inappropriately beaten by or smacked around, let's say, by our parents, right? There's others, right? There's a huge swath of the community of the population, grew up with alcoholic parents or one parent who was an alcoholic or drug abuser, right? That's also traumatizing. There's like 10 different categories that they call the ACEs, right? ACE, adverse childhood experiences, right? And I'm sorry I didn't look this up. I should have all these facts ready when I do my podcast, but you know me, shooting from the hip here. But yeah, there's the hitting, there's the alcoholism, there's the abandonment, having one parent leave or both parents leave, right? There's poverty, abject poverty is also a big stressor for children. There's anyway, I don't want to go through all 10 because I'm not going to remember all of them, but you can look it up. Right, you can certainly just ACE test in Google, and you will come up with a sample of the test, and you can take it yourself. And I recommend you do. I was shocked to learn that I have 6 out of 10. My wife has 8. So by the statistics, we should be having terrible financial problems, which we have. Right? I mean, we're getting better, but we're terrible with money. We should be alcoholics, which we both are. We should maybe even be in prison, which we're not, thankfully. But those are just a few circumstances, away. I mean, that could have happened at any given time in my life. I can't speak for my wife that way. I don't think she lived the same kind of wild childhood that I did. But yeah, I mean, I was, there were plenty of things I did that could have got me arrested, and and who knows. Anyway, so we're talking about, a vast percentage of the population that the people that you're dealing with every day, right? A vast amount of them are living with trauma. Okay, now that's just a simple factual statement. Right? I mean, when you add it all up, it certainly is over 50%, right? So that means that everybody you meet, right, there's more than a 50%. I'm just guessing at this percentage, so please don't hold me to this, but it's basically a coin toss. Every single person you meet, whether they have been through trauma and live with trauma or not, it's a coin toss, right? So every person you meet potentially is living with trauma that goes all the way back to their early childhood. Now, why do I say that? What does that mean, right? Well, when we're dealing with trauma, and depending on the kind of trauma. Oh, this was the thing I was going to say, is that to this day, there is no, in the what they call the DSM, the Diagnostic, Statistic, and Metrics, I believe it's called, which is this big book that psychiatrists have that they look up. Like they know how. A psychiatrist is trained to see your symptoms, right? And when they see your symptoms, you're dissociated, you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that. They can look that up in a big book and say, that's what's wrong with you. You have bipolar disorder. You have borderline personality disorder. You have depression, you have anxiety. That's how they do it, right? To this day, or at least a publication of this book about 10 years ago, the latest version of the DSM still would not include. They voted this author down and a whole group of people he's working with to include childhood trauma as a diagnostic thing, right? So as far as psychological medicine is concerned, it doesn't even matter, which is just mind-blowing, right? But that's where we're at, right? So in a very big way, we're on our own a little bit, you know. And the thing is that many people have sort of, you know, figured out how to live with their trauma, you know. And so, but certain traumas are, you know, maybe more pernicious than other traumas, right? And specifically what we call complex PTSD, right? So any traumatic event opens you up to the potential of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? That's PTSD. Now, post-traumatic stress disorder is generally associated with military combat, with you know, firefighters, ambulance drivers, you know, police officers, you know, hospital workers, right? And the idea, you know, the concept behind PTSD is that there's one experience, right? There's one ambush in Fallujah. There's one, you know, there's one, you know, shootout as a cop where your partner was killed. You know, there's or where you were almost killed, where you were shot. You know, one big instance that creates the trauma, which creates the traumatic stress in your body. You can't sleep, you can't eat right. Your body's all, you know, having a really hard time, right? So that's post traumatic stress disorder in the traditional sense. But now we have something called CPTSD, which is complex post traumatic stress disorder. And this is important, right? Complex post traumatic stress disorder deals with a continuous traumatizing event, right? Meaning the abuse of a parent, living for years. Because the thing is, like, a child can't just leave a situation, right? So if you, one of the other aces was a parent who's been in jail. That's one of the ones I didn't have, you know. But like, you know, if your parent is in jail, right? They're in jail for many, many, many years, right? It's not just a single thing, right? Or if your mom is you know, into slapping the crap out of you, she does so, as she did for me and my sisters, for many, many years. It's not just a one thing, right? Until I was taller than her, she was still trying, you know? So you're talking about, you know, 12 years of my life or more, right? And so what I'm trying to tell you here is that even though it's not diagnosable, and even though it's not, you know, something that a doctor would necessarily, you know, accept because of the way this whole, you know, doctor, you know, DSM thing and stuff like that, in spite of all that, there are many people like Dr. Van der Kolk, Dr. Gabor Mate, Dr. Stephen Porges even gets into this a little bit. Who else? What other doctors are out there that I can tell you about? I mean, certainly there's researchers. Dr. Dan Siegel talks about this. You know, plenty of doctors out there who will tell you that people who have dealt with trauma in their childhood, they are experiencing CPTSD, at least on some form, right? And so what that means to you and me here in this podcast, what that means is that when you go to the supermarket and you see one of those people who's a semi-stranger or even a complete stranger, when you go to work and you know, see Harriet on the other side of the room there, who you've always seen, who has these weird quirks to her personality and they really annoy you, and you wish you could just tell her to stop doing that, you know, when your spouse is, you know, is very, you know, sort of, you know, when you sense a level of you know, discomfort in your spouse, right? Every one of these situations, it is, again, barely more than a coin toss to let you know that any one of these people is suffering from some form of CPTSD or PTSD. It's that common, right? It is that common. And so, and whether it's diagnosable or not, I mean, it's just, it's a thing they're dealing with, right? Like, you know, we could even make it a very simple statement, right? Is that at least 50% of the people that you're coming across are dealing with difficult emotions that they've been carrying for many, many years, right? And so what does this mean, right? Well, it means that if somebody is dealing with a brain that is traumatized, they are technically disabled, right? They are other abled, right? They have an impediment to their ability to function the same way that you might function, right? And so we need to be kind. We need to be empathic. We need to be compassionate towards those people because, we might expect them to do or say or be able to remember something or be able to handle something in a certain way because we can handle that thing in a certain way. We can remember, we can perform, but they're dealing with a broken brain and they do not have the same tools inside their skull that you might have. And so literally they're not able to do what you want. I deal with this on a daily basis. Okay. My wife has been, I mean, she's, as I said, she's 8 out of 10 on the ACE test, right? So she's got so many issues, right? And one of the ways that this manifests is memory. Like she's got the worst memory. Like she can't remember anything. And sometimes I'm like, God, why can't you remember? That's what I feel like saying. But that's like saying to somebody who's in a wheelchair, why can't you just get up and get that thing off the grocery shelf for yourself? Why do I have to go get it for you? We would never say that to somebody who's in a wheelchair, right? I mean, that's appalling. And it's also ridiculous. It's also completely counterintuitive. Like the person can't do it. There's no way for them to get up out of their wheelchair and perform like you and I do because their body is broken. Their body doesn't work that way. Well, we need to take into account that many of the people that we're experiencing, from the anonymous people to the semi-intimate people to the intimate people, all of them, every single one of them is 50% likely, give or take, to have a broken brain. And this broken brain is going to manifest differently in every single person, right? So, like for instance, for my wife, it's memory. For me, it's certain other triggers that I have, right? Like my anger is triggered very very easily until I started working on myself, right? But that was always the thing. My anger was always right there, just boom, like just like prick the balloon and poof, here it comes, right? That was a disability of mine for all those years. And yet I would blame myself and I would beat myself up. So this is also something for yourself, right? Not just for the other people, but for yourself, right? Recognize that you might not be good at finances because of the way that you brought up. And it's not your fault, and it's technically not even your parents' fault. Like, I'm sure that if somebody pulled my mom aside when I was 5 years old and said, hey, look, if you keep hitting your son, he's going to have a lifetime of trouble. I mean, I don't think you really want to do that. She probably would have stopped, of course, right? But this is the way her father was a rageaholic if there ever was one. And I bet my bottom dollar that he used to beat the crap out of his kids with a belt, Like he was that kind of guy, And so she's living with the same trauma as me, right? So it's not her. So it's not about blaming, right? It's not about justifying. What it is about is understanding and having some compassion in that understanding, right? Seeing somebody who's struggling with something and assuming that they're struggling because of something that's happened to them. Right? In this wonderful film I recently watched called The Wisdom of Trauma. Beautiful, beautiful book. The Wisdom of Trauma. I really truly recommend that for you. It's a book basically about Dr. Gabor Mate. But in this book, there's a woman in there who works with prisons. She calls it the Compassion Prison Project or something like that. And she had this statement in this movie that just like almost knocked me off my chair. I swear that she said we have to start seeing each other for what happened to us instead of what's wrong with us. So when the next time you see somebody who just seems like, okay, there's something wrong with this person, right? Like there's something wrong with the way they just said that thing. There's something wrong with the way they just can't keep themselves together. There's something wrong with this person, right? Take a moment and ask yourself if it's more appropriate to ask the question, or to, instead of saying to ask the question, what's wrong with this person, maybe it's more appropriate for you to say, what's happened to this person. And if you think that way, then the compassion in your heart might be a bit more accessible to you. And this is going to be good for you, and it's going to be good for that person. If you have any questions, link in the description. Book a call. Let's talk. All right? Otherwise, please do all the YouTube things. Please subscribe. Please like. Please comment. Please share. Please consider donating to my Patreon page. I love doing these videos, and I want to be able to keep doing them. It would help, to have some funding. All right. So I'm not going to lie about that. I'm, not making a big deal of it yet, but it's getting there. Anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I wish you well, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.